Have you ever had one of those tiny, irrational feelings of frustration and you just can't figure out where it's coming from? And then, have you ever looked at the global economy, this massive, complex machine, and felt like it has absolutely nothing to do with your daily life? Well, what if I told you they're connected? Today, we're going to explore a tiny bug in our brains that explains both of those things, our own personal quirks, and the very engine that runs the world. Okay, so let's start with a really simple puzzle. This comes from research by Dan Ariely, who got a letter from a longtime Netflix user named Kristen. See, Netflix had just removed about 1,800 movies from its library, but at the same time, they added a few really good new ones. And Kristen wrote this. I know I probably would have never watched any of those 1,800 movies, but I am still upset about this, and I am seriously considering leaving Netflix. Why do I feel this way? And you gotta ask, right? Why would losing something you were never gonna use anyway feel so, well, so bad? To figure out Kristen's frustration, we have to diagnose the bug itself. And it all boils down to one single, incredibly powerful force that's hardwired into all of us: the fear of loss. Now, this bug has a name. It's called loss aversion. It's a key idea from social science, and it's actually pretty simple. The emotional pain of losing something is way stronger than the pleasure you get from gaining something of equal value. That's why those new, better movies Netflix added just didn't have the same emotional weight as the 1,800 movies that were taken away. So, to put it simply, the sting of losing $20 feels a whole lot worse than the joy of finding $20. Our brains aren't perfectly balanced scales. They're wired to hit the panic button on loss. This little imbalance explains Kristen's totally rational anger at Netflix. But, and this is where it gets really fascinating, the same bug doesn't just explain our feelings about movies. It explains our entire financial world. All right, so how does this bug scale up? How do we get from being annoyed about a streaming service to, the foundation of global finance? Well, we have to zoom out, from our own internal feelings to the shared story that our whole economy runs on: money. And that brings up a really important question. I mean, if our brains freak out over losing movies we'd never even watch, what happens when the stakes are higher? What happens when it's about money itself? Like, what actually makes this piece of paper in my wallet worth $20? Charles Whelan, in his book Naked Money, just lays it out there. That $20 bill, it's just a piece of paper. It has no intrinsic value. You can't march down to the Federal Reserve and trade it in for gold or silver. As he says, the officials there would offer you nothing. It's not backed by a physical thing. So, what is it then? And here is the central magic trick of our entire modern economy. A $20 bill is worth $20 for one and only one reason: because all of us, together, believe that it is. That's it. It's a shared story, a kind of collective agreement. Its value only exists as long as we all believe the next person will accept it. Which, of course, leads to a pretty terrifying follow-up question. If the whole value of our money is just based on a story we all agree to tell each other, what happens when people stop believing in that story? What happens when that shared trust just disappears? You get a number like this one: 80 billion%. And no, that is not a typo. That was the monthly inflation rate in Zimbabwe back in November of 2008. When the government printed way too much money, the shared story just shattered. Faith in the currency evaporated, and its value went to zero. People had $100 trillion bills that couldn't even buy a loaf of bread. That's what happens when the belief holding money together just breaks. Okay, so this gets to a super important point: understanding the difference between the number printed on a bill, its nominal value, and what it can actually buy, its real value. Charles Whelan has this great example from Hollywood. If you just look at the nominal dollars, the face value of ticket sales, The Avengers looks like one of the biggest movies of all time. But that's kind of misleading, right? Because a movie ticket in 2012 costs way more than in 1939. When you adjust for inflation and look at the real value, the true king of the box office is actually Gone with the Wind. That's the real measure. And the exact same thing is true for money. All right, so let's connect the dots here. We've got loss aversion, that powerful, irrational fear of losing stuff. And we've got money, a system built entirely on collective trust. So what happens when you inject that human brain bug into this very delicate system of belief? Well, you get financial panics. Whelan gives us a perfect picture of this. Imagine a town where instead of money, people deposit their rice and get paper certificates. As long as everyone believes they can trade that paper for their rice, the system works fine. But, as he puts it, if there's even a whiff of doubt, you are going to have a mob banging on your door and demanding rice. That tiny whiff of doubt is all it takes to bring the whole thing down. And that whiff of doubt triggers this terrifying but predictable chain reaction. It all starts with just a whisper, a rumor that a bank might be in trouble. So a few cautious people, acting perfectly rationally, go to withdraw their money, just in case. But then other people see the lines forming, and that powerful loss aversion just kicks in. The brain screams, "I better get my money out before it's gone." The fear becomes contagious. The small trickle of people turns into a stampede. And then, the tragedy. The bank, which of course doesn't keep all its cash in a vault, can't meet the demand, and it collapses. The fear of loss creates the very loss everyone was afraid of. You've probably seen this scene in the classic movie, It's a Wonderful Life. This is the moment where George Bailey has to explain the reality of banking to a panicked mob. He says, "The money's not here. It's in Joe's house and in the Kennedy house." He's trying to tell them that a bank is a story of shared community investment. But in a panic, nobody's listening to the story anymore. They can only hear that whisper of potential loss. So here it is. This is the fundamental connection we've been building up to. A bank run isn't some complex, mysterious financial event that only experts can understand. It's just loss aversion. It's the exact same feeling that made Kristen mad at Netflix, but it's playing out on a massive, collective, and incredibly destructive scale. It's a psychological bug causing a systemic crash. So what does all of this actually mean for you? It means that the economy isn't some cold, calculating machine that operates on pure logic. It is deeply, fundamentally, and, it turns out, predictably human. And that realization gives you a whole new lens to see the world through. The global economy can seem so complex and intimidating, right? But its wild swings and weird behaviors aren't random. It runs on the very same predictable bugs and biases that are hardwired into our own brains. It's not a machine, it's just a giant reflection of our own collective psychology. So let's just quickly recap the big takeaways here. First, our brains are wired to fear a loss way more than they appreciate an equivalent gain. Second, the value of our money isn't based on something real like gold. It's based entirely on a shared story of belief. Third, when that belief starts to crumble, our built-in fear of loss can trigger catastrophic, system-wide panics. And finally, and maybe most importantly, understanding this little bug in our own brains can help demystify not just our own quirky choices, but the huge movements of the global economy. So I'll leave you with this final thought. If the story of money has this much power over all of us, what other collective stories, what other shared beliefs that we just take for granted every single day are shaping our world in ways we don't even realize?